fleet of limos, a Playboy model girlfriend. He was Mr. Big Shot, a drug kingpin in Chicago. He was moving kilos of cocaine every week, making about $100,000 a month. Well, then came 15 years of prison and reflection and some maturity. Well, today, he's a businessman in Chicago, and he counsels kids not to tread the tough guy path of crime and money, and he counsels businessmen as well. He writes about it all in his book called Tall Money. Well, John, when you were a 19, 20-year-old low-life living the high life, what'd you think? It was just going to go on forever?
No, Bill, it was a way to get out of debt. I smashed my car. My father was upset with me. I wasn't going to college. And the way things went, things kept thrown in my lap. Someone I grew up with was living in Florida when he was a kid, and all of a sudden we're getting these kilos for crazy prices. And
it was easy money, and you liked the big tough guy image.
Well, yeah, to an extent. You know, the movies, you know, the gangster movies and all that, 19-year-old kid with no brains, that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, what changed you then? Was it a 45-year prison sentence?
No, it was, you know, I'm Greek. My parents, you know, my mother was like, John, I raised you better than this. And, you know, to go home and see how upset she was. And then some of the Greeks I looked up to were like, John, you know, you're hurting kids. And, you know, I wanted to have a family of my own someday. And I'm like, I got to get out of this.
So maturity, it sounds
exactly,
like.
Yeah.
So you talk to businessmen, you talk to entrepreneurs. What do you tell them?
You know, like before I bought the weenie wagon, I was in the car business.
That's your business. It's a hot dog stand.
It's a hot dog stand. And to be at the top, you've got to shoot for the top. So when I was in the car business, I was paying out of my pocket to go to these Joe Verdi seminars. And then motivational, you know, here's the top pros in the industry telling you how to close deals, be good on the phone, be an excellent manager as far as motivate your staff. And then, you know, I get to the weenie wagon. I've taken the college courses and the culinary courses I took when I was away. And everything coupled together, I look at it like, how can I be the best in my industry, you know? So I'll pit suppliers against one another. I had Vienna beef and Red Hot Chicago.
See, you love being a businessman.
Oh,
I mean,
it's great.
It sounds like it's just two different people.
Yeah, the kid's dead from 19. Now, 19-year-old John Cappas is dead, never to come back. I mean, now, to me, I get out of bed and I'm always trying to figure out, you know, how I'm going to be better and set myself apart from everyone else around me. What
do you tell your employees? You motivate them too.
Yeah, I tell them, you know, let's make the customers happy, number one. Let's not argue with the customers. If you make someone's sandwich wrong, don't take it back.
That's different from what you were. You'd bust somebody's chops.
No, I would never do that, Bill.
Come on.
But you can't take a guy to small claims court back in the 80s. But I mean, it's like, does it make sense to argue with a customer? I'm like, no, let them keep the first sandwich, make them another one, and say you're sorry. And they're going to come back. You want to win the battle or you want to win the war?
John Cappas, Tall Money is the name of the book. John, thanks so much.
Thanks again, Bill.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Behind Enemy Lines. This is a special segment. I have my good friend who I grew up with in the southwest side of Chicago, John Cappas. Paul's going to take a break tonight because this is kind of a story that me and John are integrated, growing up together, and some of the things that we've been through and the transformation. So this segment today, even though we're going to talk about some of the sensational stories and things that we've done, right? Don't confuse the sensational stories and the things that we're going to share with you is an endorsement of that lifestyle. Okay, I want to be very clear. Don't confuse the sensational stories and some of the things that we're going to share with you as an endorsement of the lifestyle that's behind us. We're no longer, those people. You heard John say that in the segment, right? That person's dead. Well, not all of that person is dead. Just like with me, there's elements of what we were then that made us the men we are today, the courage to fight, to be successful, to do the things that we're doing business-wise, and John will talk a little bit about that. So we're gonna talk about Southwest Side, the mob, cartels, the feds, betrayal, prison, and transformation, which is the biggest takeaway that we want you to get from this story. So before I start, I want John just to introduce himself and talk about what he's doing now, because he did own the weenie wagon. He grew it. He grew the business, sold the business, and then he's a manager at a very large dealership now. So John, why don't you do a quick introduction, and we'll jump in, and then we'll go back and forth to the
Sure. All right. Thanks for having me on, Terry. I am a manager at Ziegler Ford in North Riverside, one of the largest Ford stores on the south side. Big corporate group. I want to say thank you to Brian Malpelli for getting me in there. 40 dealerships in 4 states, it's a machine. It really is. I'm honored to work there under Frank and Kevin, 2 studs. So I'm very happy where I'm at right now.
So John wrote the book Tall Money, and you're going to hear about elements of that book as we talk about the crazy shit we did on the South Side. Excuse me, I'm fighting a summer cold, by the way. And that book is being written in a screenplay now, right? And
yes, there's a screenplay. There's negotiations now for the option for a movie. I can't say too much, but it looks pretty good.
I think it's going to have to be a miniseries on
Netflix.
There's
Miniseries,
too much
movie,
to squeeze in there, right?
Whatever happens. You know?
So I was proud that he wrote the book. When he went away, I stayed in contact with him, and there's a lot of crossover. So real quickly, before we jump into his story, you understand, John and I met at a gym together when we were working out, Hammer's Gym on the Southwest Side.
Oh, yeah.
We were both young, we weren't like competitive body, but we were between bodybuilding and powerlifting, kind of, right? I couldn't stand in that little stupid-ass thong like my friends, right?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that we didn't take as serious as the other guys was the dieting part.
Yeah.
But it was that we were dedicated to working out. And unfortunately for John and me and many, many other guys, right, we met in a super alpha male Southwest Side Chicago gym. And we met a lot of different people and different elements that we got exposed to that we probably wouldn't have been exposed. John went to Marist High School, a very prominent high school on the Southwest Side. I went to Oak Lawn. It's not prominent.
Yeah.
I'm from hometown. I grew up in a 725 square foot little shithole, right, John? Remember?
I grew up in Oak Lawn.
So we started working out there. We made friends. John and I became in the same circle together. I was working at a big, not a big, but a very popular bar at the time, and these older Italian brothers kind of recruited and groomed me, unknown to me. I never seen drugs, never knew anything about that. And back in the 80s, it was a big thing. I think everybody knows that with Miami Vice and all that stuff, right? And so both of us were recruited kind of in parallel, I think, at the same time. And they were transitioning from chop shops into selling drugs. And part of that was the recruitment into the opportunity to, I was working $6 an hour, working as a doorman, going to Moraine Valley Junior College. And I was exposed to something that really, changed my life. And then I started recruiting friends, hey, jump on the bandwagon, win the lottery, right? I mean, it's like, hey, I'm doing them a favor. Like, so we're not going to say a lot of these people's names, right? Many of the people that we grew up with are either dead, in prison, going back and forth to prison. Some of them changed their lives like us. Not a lot of them, but some of them changed their lives. So we're not going to mention names as we talk about John's book and some of the things we went through. So I was recruited into something, and because of the connection, grew very quickly because I didn't do drugs, grew very quickly. John, actually, as we transitioned, John was working with me at the time until I got popped. And I was like, poor me, I got popped first, I'm like, oh man, it sucks. I was like, fuck, all those guys are out now, they're making money and stuff.
I wish I got popped first too.
Yeah, so then I'm coming out on work release, I about shit. I'm looking up on the screen. There's John on TV with the feds and all this crazy stuff in the boat. He'll talk about Giselle Fernandez. And there's another...
Easy about these last names.
Oh,
Come
sorry.
on, slow down.
Yeah, sorry.
Jesus.
So there's one thing that John... I was intent on transforming my life and changing, right? And getting out and getting married. And John was the person who... this is still to this day, right? 35 years later. Let me know about our friends... the guys that we worked for, the guys that I worked for, the guys that I didn't cooperate with. I get out on my work release. I talk to John. You get the little pay phones. He's like, hey, Terry, your fiance is in the Bahamas with the guys we work for. Do you remember that, John?
Yeah.
Paradise Island?
That's a shame.
I was fucking devastated. I could have put them in jail. I didn't. And then my fiance I was supposed to marry begged me to put him in jail, begged me to cooperate. And John's like, you're not going to believe it. It fucking killed me. So there's a lot of things that, enough about that. We'll talk about it later. So this is about John. What's that?
Before we get too deep, we got to do the
All right. So we're going to jump into John's story, and our stories are intertwined together. So we'll go back and forth. Before I went away, and then where he picks up, and I guess good news, bad news. we had a couple of different stash houses, and he inherited some stuff from. I'm not going to say names. Remember, someone I know very well was flushing.
More like I had to bail Terry out when he got cracked. Someone had to go pick up a load.
Yeah,
and make sure that he didn't get busted with the bigger load.
And somebody else was flushing half of it down the fucking toilet.
Yeah.
Oh my God! It's like I'm not. So
okay.
anyway,
We'll tell that story in a minute.
So let's do the commercial. When we come back from the commercial, we're going to jump into John's and let him kind of lead, and I'll jump in when needed.
We will not bend. We will not break. We will not yield. We will never give in. We will never give up, and we will never back down. We will never ever surrender. Because we are Americans, and our hearts bleed red, white, and blue.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, IFA. Thank you very much. We got to do the Mike Lindell commercial, too. Don't forget that. I mean, not right now. Not right now. But as me and John are bullshitting here, we haven't sold. Hey, listen, you guys. We haven't sold one fucking. Sorry, I swore. We haven't sold one pillow. All right. There, my pillow. You go to Bell 1776. Bell 7. We got to sell. Someone buy a pillow.
We got to make some.
Right. Mike is fighting his court battle. We haven't made a penny. Bell 1776. Anything you buy from mypillow.com, we get a percentage of it, and it helps us out. So we're gonna go to Mr. Cappas. And John, why don't you, because there's so much packed in here, right? So why don't you start maybe at the gym and like when you got into this and like how it kind of progressed and we weren't in. Neither one of us were addicted to drugs. We got addicted to the money.
Yeah.
The money.
I never did
drugs.
a line. Even till this day, I never did a line of cocaine.
He never did. I wasn't an angel. But,
So I used to wear my Sangs Taekwondo jacket to the gym. I worked out with my brother, and this guy came up to me in the gym. This is how it all started. He's like, hey, I'm having a problem with this guy. He goes, can you help me? And I'm looking at him like, what can I do for you? And he's like, well, this guy owes me money. He owes me a few $1,000s. And I'm working at my dad's liquor store. I think I'm clearing $180 a week, working 6 days a week. And he's like, John, this guy's big. I don't know if I can handle him. And, he goes, I owe people money. He owes me. Come with me. And I said, what are you going to give me? He goes, I'll give you $500. Back then, in the 80s, $500 was a lot of money. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the ride with you. And we ended up going to a party. And I ended up saying, go ask him for your money. And the guy's like, I'm scared he's going to beat me up. I said, no, you don't have to be scared. Just ask him for your money. So the first thing I did, I was like, hey, rabbit ears, buddy. Let's see what you got in your pocket. And he's looking at me, and I just blasted him. And everybody's sitting there around the table freebasing. We're in Marquette Park.
Oh,
we're not from Marquette Park. We're
Yeah.
from the suburbs, which is Oak Lawn and all that. And so they're all grabbing the pipe thinking I'm going to steal the cocaine. And I'm like, I'm not here to steal the cocaine. I said, how much money do you got? And he's on the floor holding his face. And I tell the guy that asked me to come, like, you better look at the TV and the stereo. And we ended up taking some stuff out of the house. And he's like, come with me. That was pretty cool. So after about 2 weeks, I tell my buddies, I go, all right, guys, I know exactly what we're going to do. And I ended up taking the cocaine and making grams out of it and telling everybody, here, you go here, you go here. And before you knew it, the bouncers at all the bars worked out at Hammers. So I was like,
yeah.
Everybody got us in the bars, and I had everybody going to bars. First, it was 10 of my friends. Then it was 20. Then it was 30 of my friends. So now it goes to one guy, an older guy goes, you need a lawyer. So they introduced me to this lawyer. I'm not going to mention his name. And they're like, this guy's got everything under control. You're never going to go to jail. And sure enough.
Does it begin with an E?
I'm not going to say another
no,
name.
E. Letter E?
Hey, stop.
All right,
no
sorry.
last names.
All right.
All right, so now, it's here, just a speeding ticket in a Corvette, 100 miles over the limit. The courtroom's packed, and I am waiting for him to check me in, and he just nods his hand to the judge. And then me and him go up to the podium, and he's like to the state's attorney, he's like, how many tickets has Cappas had? And they're like, none. And I'm thinking to myself, none. I know I've had at least 10 speeding tickets in the last 2 years. And they're like $500 fine, $100, 100 miles an hour, in a 55. And I was amazed. And the lawyer's like, every time you waste my time with these tickets, it's going to be $500. So then it turned into, we meet these cops. And the lawyer's telling me, well, these cops want to buy some cocaine. And I'm thinking, are you serious, cops? And he's like, I wanted you to come in my office. And I'm reading the FBI 302s on the homicides they're under investigation for. And this lawyer's like, I got in a little trouble. I want you to sell them coke. They're going to give you the codes to the DEA scanners. So we had a Bearcat scanner, and I'm listening on this universal codes, listening to what places are under surveillance, who's talking to the feds, what area they're in. So here I am, like 19, 20 years old, way over my head, and it's like everybody's promising you it's going to be okay. From the lawyers like, I got it. Just don't cross state lines. Don't sell kilos, sell ounces. Don't go out of the country. The cops got you covered. And then the cops are like, we want to take down some drug dealers. I'm like, what do you mean?
The war on drugs back then.
And it's like, no, we want to rob drug dealers. Who can set us up with some multi-kilo deals. And I'm like, no. I said, these are my friends. I grew up with these guys. It's not going to happen. I'm not the guy. And then I'm like, I only sell a few grams at parties, just enough to buy a new car every year and go on vacation. And they're like, you're lying to me. So ended up when I quit, one of my friends did get kidnapped and did get murdered by a cop. I'm not going to go too much in that story yet. Stop. You're going to get us indicted on the show.
Yes.
So anyways, it was a sad thing because I do come from a very good family on the South Side, a great
good
family. And a lot of my cousins got very upset. The Cappas name was all over the TV. And my mother would be like, John, I raised you better than this. What are you doing? You got to stop. And I did quit a year before we got indicted. But it didn't help. The feds wanted blood. And
Can I say something about your father real quick?
yeah, go ahead.
So John, I know both, John's mom and dad and his sister, and when I saw it, he originally got 45 years in prison. I was fucking devastated, right? And then as I came home, I changed my life. I was wearing a suit. I go downtown. I go down, go past Archer, Cappas Liquors next to and I go by and I'm like, so John's father owned this liquor store forever. And I was like, man, I felt, so I just, we're all in this together, right? And I know his family's a great family, you know what I mean? And so I finally got the courage to go in there, like 1 a.m, like at 9 or something in the morning when I was going downtown to a sales call. And your dad was behind the bar. I go, is Mr. Cappas here? And they go, there he is right there. And I said, hey, I'm Terry Newsome. Do you remember me? He goes, of course I do. I go, how's John doing? And he stuck out his hand, and he goes, all I want is my son back. I almost started crying.
Yeah.
I felt,
What it was terrible. I mean,
Go ahead.
The worst thing it was Nancy Reagan's war on drugs. Just say no to drugs. Janet Reno screaming. They're like, we're going to make a poster child out of every city from California, New York, Chicago, all the way through Detroit. And then I was the poster child for Chicago. And it was very unfortunate. 2 kids ended up committing suicide. It was like, I brought drugs in. We sold drugs to a guy who sold drugs to a guy who sold drugs to another guy, and then here's a kid that commits suicide. And at the trial, I'm like to my lawyer, I'm like, I don't know these kids. They had the address books. They had the drug notes. Kids' names weren't there. And just to drive through the town of Mount Greenwood gave me the creeps. And it was sad. And, you don't have a time machine to turn back the clock and take back what happened.
So I want to jump in again here. Do you remember Richard Roper?
Yeah, so
Piece of shit.
Richard Roper, again, we're going to stay away from last names, but
I'm not. He's a piece of shit.
All right, so
anyways, blamed John for that.
Yeah, Richard Roper was a guy's like, I saw Cappas at parties.
He wrote columns in the Sun-Times.
Yeah, and he's like, he used to wear the jackets, and we'd go to the parties, and they'd start fights. And yeah, we did have jackets. Southside Enterprises, JC's Enterprises. We were going to get a softball. We were going to get a softball team together, me and my buddies, and we picked for the logo the gangster in the pinstripe shoot with a machine gun. And
Do you remember the letter I sent to Roper? Remember I told you about it, defending you, right? I think I might have been locked up, and I sent it from there. So he was slamming John. He used to be a big shot. I don't know where that guy is now. Is he around?
I think he's
a
done
piece of
very
shit,
well.
right? So he was.
I think
really?
he's done very well. I
he's
think
still
he's
a piece of shit
in Hollywood movies or something like that.
Yeah, so he was slamming John unfairly. You heard what John just said, right? Again, everything we did was wrong, right? I mean, it was wrong. John had nothing to do with it. But think about it. These two guys in Mount Greenwood, young guys, the first guy committed suicide, the second guy committed suicide in the church, right? In his church.
Yeah.
Both of their fathers were Chicago cops, and I think one or both of them used their father's revolver.
I don't know the facts of the case. I'm sorry it happened.
So let me finish here. This is in defense of you. So when I sent Roper after he was blaming John, all this stuff is awful what happened, but you know what? I got a son. My son's 17 years old. And if I was a Chicago cop, type A personality, police officer, and if my son got mixed up with some 19-year-old punk, right, that owes him money, I would expect my son to come to me and say, Dad, so they're trying to say they were scared of the guys under John. That's bullshit, right? I would expect my son, my child, to come to me knowing his dad's a type A personality police officer and say, Daddy, help me. I'm scared of this guy. I screwed up, Dad. But you know what? The relationship between those two guys and their fathers was so bad that those kids decided to take their lives instead of asking their fathers for help.
Well,
right?
Here's the thing. We don't know what happened. That's something we should stay away from.
But we know they didn't have nothing to do with it. It wasn't your fault.
But there was government witnesses that had strong implications in what happened. But of course the government protected them. But we don't know what happened. It's sad. I'm sorry it happened. And it's a topic that there's no winning in any
That's
argument.
right.
It's just really bad what happened, and they weren't the only ones.
No.
There's a few more people that got killed. One of our friends bringing back a load ended up getting kidnapped and murdered.
Donnie Dillon? Remember Donnie Dillon?
Yeah, Donnie Dillon was one of them. Yeah, so everybody panicked. What happened to him? He got kidnapped. He got murdered. I was lucky. I mean, imagine being in a hotel room in Miami, and then all of a sudden you're strapped to a chair with a plastic bag over your head, and they're like, "We want the whole load. We want all the money." So
I was in Miami with the older D guy, the DA, not DA, but.
Yeah.
And I can't speak Spanish, and I was with him in Little Cuba, just like out of like Scarface, right? And we're like in this hotel, sitting there thinking, oh my God, we could die like that, and you're so stupid and dumb, young, Never mind. I'll skip from that there.
Yeah, but it's a shame, and with something that we stopped, but the feds they came after us huge, and it was like the media was like, it was a circus, and the best way I could put it is the girl I'm dating at the time, I'm on the run and I'm getting something to eat, and there's the newspapers are in the newspaper box, and it says Cappas' girlfriend is in federal protection, gonna be the main witness against Cappas, and she's sitting right next to me, and I'm like, oh my God, what, are you serious? And then we started laughing, and I ended up meeting some people in the media, and the bottom line is, whatever the U.S. Attorney's Office wants on the news, it will be there. And if the news media doesn't play the game of the U.S. Attorney's Office, they will get cut off. They will not get a story. And firsthand, I watched them take a girl down and throw her out of Chicago. And for why? For fair, unbiased reporting. It was crazy, So
the guy that arrested you. We're not going to say names, right?
Yeah.
It had, it was in the paper, and he threw him up. What's that? It was in the paper, and it was in the news, and this guy was kind of like being a gunslinger with John, and they tried to get me to talk. Remember the guy that went to Notre Dame, the big guy by my house?
Yeah.
Right. And his girlfriend that was a waitress downtown.
Sure.
And they tried to strong-arm me and to say that I saw this guy's girlfriend doing X, Y, and Z, and I better, and I'm like, I never did. I'm like, no, you did. I'm like, no, I never did. You know what I mean? They do shit like that to try to force you into saying something to save your own ass. So everything he's saying is true.
Yeah, so, I mean, and then they're talking about, you know, of course we're doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
You know, and I'm living at my mother's house now. The feds seize my house. Feds kick you out of the house. They seize the house. They're like, yeah, well, you know, you could prove it later that you're not guilty. So I got a civil proceeding going. Then the criminal indictment didn't even hit till months later. And, you know, one day they're banging on the door. And I mean hard. And my mother's like, comes running down the stairs like, John, in Greek, Panayim, oh my God, they're breaking the door down. It's the police. So I just put my shoes on and my sweats and I go to the front door. And instead of ringing the doorbell, they're punching the door. So I rip the door open, and here's this tall, skinny kid from Texas, I think he was from. And I'm like, what are you doing? What's the matter with you? You don't see the doorbell? You trying to intimidate somebody? And he's like, you're going to jail. And he's like, here, I got a grand jury subpoena. And I was so mad, I just crumbled the subpoena up and threw it on the ground. And I'm like, get the F off my property. If you're not here to arrest me, get off my property. So another cop is trying to talk to me who was actually Greek. And he starts speaking Greek to me, and I'm like, do not speak Greek to me. You're an agent. And another agent tried to say something, and I told the lead agent, I was so upset. I'm like, take your gun and your badge off. I'd like to whip your ass up and down this driveway. And he's sitting there, you're going to jail. So, you know, I'm a hothead. They're upset. And the reason why I couldn't stand these people is my one friend, I asked him, he had nothing to do with it. I said, hey, I'm buying a Cadillac. I'd like you to put it in your name. I'll give you a couple grand. I don't want to put it in my name. And that's what I did with all my cars.
Under $10,000.
And yeah, you know, you got to make payments under $10,000.
Yep.
And he's like, yeah, no problem. So the feds, of course, go to his house. His mother's there, a religious lady. And they're like, whose Cadillac is that? There's an Eldorado here. And he's like, it's my car. So here's this little kid who didn't do anything wrong. And they're like, we're going to ask you one more time. And the mother's watching from the screen door. So they stick a gun down his throat, cock the trigger. They're like, I'm going to ask you one more time, whose car is that? And the mother comes out, this is my son. He did nothing wrong. Stop. And they're like, shut up, you whore, before I kick you in the sea. And I'm like, oh, my God. So they call me up crying. And that's how I ended up meeting the reporter. I'm like, tell this guy, whoever this guy is, I'll meet him. And you can film me and him brawling. I want to beat his ass for the 10 o'clock news. And then that's when I really started to, you know, figure out this is how much trouble we're in. So not only was it the DEA, it was Chicago Police, DEA, IRS, Meg agent. Man, I was like, holy cow.
So you remember your father said something to you, warned you? Do you remember my mom's fiance at that time was a tactical cop? Remember that guy Ken?
Yeah.
He warned me. I thought they were full of shit. You know what I mean? They're trying to scare.
Yeah. My dad said it best. He
Yeah.
goes, you know what? You think that your friends are going to stand up? Everybody's going to rat on you before it's all over. I ended up going to trial with two guys. And one of the guys tried to cut a deal, and the Fed said, no, we don't need you. So I only had one friend of mine that I went to trial with, this kid, Mike. And he was really the only stand-up guy. So it was 72 witnesses at a 6-week trial. And I couldn't believe the people that just kept coming in. I mean, they even went and got my jeweler, who was on vacation. They gave him a subpoena at the resort, made him fly back in town for the trial. It was like what the extent they went through was crazy.
And so, John, I know we'll talk about this later on. So, like, John speaks to people when they're getting out to try to give them hope and courage and change their life. And I did the same thing. And I would speak to these guys on work release, and especially with young kids, right? And I said, listen, you get involved in this lifestyle and you do this, you know who your worst enemy is. You know, and I come up with a bunch of different sayings. Your worst enemy is your best friend. Your best friend is the first person they'll go after, and your best friend is the first person that's going to roll on you, right? They get all your friends there, and it's very, very rarely that you will find a really good best friend that's going to keep his mouth shut when the feds come and threaten him with, 50 years in prison or losing everything. I don't know if you agree with that. But
yeah, I mean, I go into the juvenile detention center, and here you are with some of the youngest offenders in the city of Chicago. You're talking 15, 16-year-old kids. And you look at these kids, they're all in there for homicides, and they look like little babies. They look like kids that should be waiting to get on the school bus with their backpack And the problem is, you got the older gangbangers that know the system, and they're like, hey, you want to be with us? You want to be with, let's just say, the Vice Lords or the Gangster Disciples? You got to shoot that guy. So they got a kid with a baseball cap and a backpack with his little school jacket on, walks up to a corner of older gangsters and just starts opening fire. And in the little kid's mind, he thinks he's playing cops and robbers. He don't even know what he's doing. So I'm up there on stage, and I'm telling these kids, I'm like, listen, you guys, you got in the wrong game. You probably didn't have any guidance. Nobody to tell you anything different. And it's a shame. A lot of the problems in the city is the single-parent family, and the gang becomes the father. Mm-hmm. And so now they look up to the wrong guys, and the guys are sending them on these suicide missions. It's the best way to think about it is like the old kamikaze pilots. Enough gas to get there and just to crash. And I'm sitting there telling them, guys, you got to go to school. You got to get a diploma. You got to have a piece of paper that shows somebody that you have spent your time studying, you passed the test, you put a couple years in, 4 years in, you got your degree, that you are able to run his business. And the only way you're going to get a shot is to have a diploma. So at the end of me pouring my lungs out, telling them what happened to me, telling them one of my friends is in jail for life. One of my friends shot someone, this kid, Nick, never going to go home again. And he calls me up, John, could you do anything for me? Could you get me a lawyer? And I'm like, Nick, you've had several appeals. The terrorism bill is just, there's only 2 appeals. Nick, Nick, this kid, poor kid, Nick. Yeah. Nick from the north side.
Oh,
and
G.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm pouring my heart out to these kids and telling them the only way you guys are going to make it out of the city and get a good career is school. You got to get this degree. Uh-huh. So after I'm talking and I get up and I'm shaking hands with the kids, one kid walks up to me and he goes, hey, let me ask you a question. He goes, were you ever in jail with any of the GDs? And I'm saying to myself, I'm like, man, this is how bad it is. This is a 14 or 15-year-old kid with the only thing that's important to him is who is he going to be with. And it's rough. Yeah. And that's why the parents got to get these kids involved with sports to take them off the street at night. They got to make sure they're in school. And they got to drill into them that the only way out of the city to a better neighborhood in the suburbs, to a better life, to get to college is through education. And it's like you can't think that using your hands is going to bring you a good future. The mind, your most ultimate weapon that gets sharper with use. And that's when I speak. The adults, of course, they love the speech. And I tell them from where I started to where I'm at now. But it's very hard to talk to some of these kids that have been brainwashed.
Let me jump
and
in here.
By these older gangbangers.
Yeah, so I used to speak at the Safer Foundation when they come on work release. I don't know if you're,
I've heard of
at
it,
the state level. So I go in there, and this was in the 90s, actually, back in the late 90s. And so you don't want to walk in there as a white person from the suburbs. You want to talk about the things you've done so they could understand a little bit. Then you transition to what you've become, right? And what was kind of disappointing is, like, to John's point about the Gangster Disciples thing, right? GDs, Gangster Disciples. The questions, after I'm done, any questions, they start, like I tell about my story, about my friend, you were locked up at the time. They start asking me questions about that instead of what I am now. And I was like, it was kind of frustrating because I'm here trying to give you guys hope and courage that, not all these people can change their lives, right? I would tell them, I said, listen, if you're running a drug organization on the street, you have the same tools to be successful in a job, because you know what? If you're selling drugs, you have to do accounts receivable, warehousing, collectibles, and collections, and all this other stuff. Except you got to worry about being shot, killed, murdered, going to prison. So you might as well. There's never a shortcut. There's no shortcut ever, and just focus on doing the right things and applying those skills you have. And it's hard, to John's point, to get through these kids because that's all they knew, right? And they gravitated towards the first part of the story, not the second. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, so I even went to the church. So I'm Greek, one of the guys that, really tight with the face.
Wait. Being that you're Greek, did you like it in jail?
Hey. So anyways, remember to tell me, Terry, you're Italian, aren't you?
Yeah.
It takes 3 Italians to beat 1 Greek at anything, right?
Yeah.
So just remember that, too, before you come talk out of the side of his neck. So anyways, I went to the Greek church, And my buddy's like, my daughter's going to be there. He goes, John, kind of like speak a little easy. I don't really, she doesn't really know her way around the streets. So I get up there and I'm talking and I'm like, all right, listen. I said, I told a couple stories about some of the guys, and I said, you girls, I want you to remember something. One girl from the neighborhood ended up getting high, and she was out of her mind. And a couple guys took advantage of her, and they had her in a hotel room. And I says, and do you know till this day, this girl, they still talk about behind her back because she chose one night to get high, didn't know what she was doing. A couple big mouth guys bragging about what they did. So don't be that girl that decides to get high, loses her judgment, and then all of a sudden everybody's going to make fun of you the rest of your lives because nobody's going to want to marry that girl that was in that hotel room. And my buddy comes after I talked. I went into more detail and all that. Not crazy detail, but he's like, John, my daughter came home to me and she said, oh, my God, Dad, that could never happen to me. I would die. And he hugged me and he kissed me, this guy, George, and he goes, Johnny, he goes, you really can reach these kids. You ought to speak more. And I was speaking for a while, but, when COVID came out, it shut everything down. And having a business that got shut down by COVID and trying to keep everything afloat, the last few years were very tough having a restaurant in the COVID business. So here we are. So, Terry, you got anything else you want to say?
Yeah. So we'll talk about some of the stories. I mean, so this...
let's not get too crazy.
Yeah, we're not getting... So,
can't glamorize all this stuff, but we can talk.
But it is kind of fun.
It is.
It is. God, where do we start? Oh, I guess we could go through some... Why don't we go through the slides? You want to go through the slides, right?
Go ahead.
And we'll talk to these are just some... John was national news. We got a couple of mine peppered in there, but these are mostly about John and guys in our ecosystem at that time.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, God. Well, these are newspapers, so we could say names. This is out for the public to consume.
Dave
right?
Avery.
Yep. Yeah, this
one
guy's
of
a
the
piece
most
of crap.
Biggest muscle-bound guys at the gym.
Yes, huge.
Biggest coward at the gym, too.
Yeah, somebody blew his car up.
Yeah, I don't know who burned his car, but you and I got blamed for burning cars.
Yep.
And why was cars burned? Because people didn't pay their bills and you couldn't take them to small claims court.
And actually, each car on the other side blew up on accident.
Yeah. I think there was even a night that someone said, come on down, I want to talk to you, and he wouldn't come out of his apartment, and they still burned his car right in front of him.
Go ahead.
So anyways, keep going.
Oh, there we go. 43 indictments. This was after, this guy got popped, I think, twice, right? And then some idiots kept working with him.
He was the biggest informant, turned everybody in. I went to jail. I didn't say nothing about anybody.
Yeah.
So I could have brought about 20 guys to jail. I didn't say nothing.
I went first. You didn't say nothing.
And so for me to see this guy's name, why don't you switch the slide?
Yeah.
I'm a stand-up guy.
Okay, this is a friend of ours that was the guy that we worked for. His friend, he's a few years older than me, 5-6 years older than John. Nice guy. He got messed up. He took a kilo. He partied. We didn't know he had a drug problem. He ran around naked in his neighborhood, went through some stranger's house, the back door, naked, and then he stuck his head in the dryer.
Yeah.
We'll go on from there. Sorry. Okay, so this is John's part of John's story. Matter of fact, you know what's interesting is that John's judge his wife was my tutor when I was a child, right? And I was away at college when John was going through this. I didn't even know this till afterwards. Oh, and then Mitch Mars was on my case as well. He was he died of cancer. And I don't have any animosity against those guys, even though some of the...
Mars was cool.
Yeah, he was. He was
Mitch
the U.S.
Mars
attorney.
didn't have anything against me like Prosperi. Prosperi, the other prosecutor, took it with a passion. I mean, this guy, if it was up to him, I would have probably got electrocuted. It was... He got crazy.
So there's this Dave Avery guy. You can see this guy was young then. Let's see how big he is. And he cooperated. A lot of our friends. I gave him up back when he had a Corvette, black Corvette. I went and meet with him, and he started doing it in the street and doing burnouts. Remember how crazy he was? And then he went on and he set up my friend Mike Kennedy. Remember Mike Kennedy?
Yeah, Kennedy, after he got set up by Avery, came to my house. He's like, I need some cocaine. Yeah. And I'm like, Mike, you're drunk. There's no reason.
Was he trying to set you up?
So the funniest thing was this. He takes a butane lighter, and he's got it on his head, and he's holding the butane.
He was a rockhead, man.
And the poor kid's, all the butane is going in his hair. And so then he goes, John, if you don't give me cocaine, I'm going to light my hair on fire. I said, go ahead. So when he did, his hair went up like a balloon of fire. So I'm like, holy shit. I didn't even know what to do. I had to grab a towel, throw it in the sink, put it over his head. And then he had all these patches of
he was a rockhead.
And I'm like, you better go get a crew cut, bro. You look terrible.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, look at me. I'm dying here.
There he is. There's Kennedy.
Yeah, Mike.
There's Mike Kennedy.
I felt so bad for him.
He was a good guy. Dave Avery set him up, the guy we were talking about.
I felt so bad for Mike.
So go ahead, Jay. You guys know this guy.
There it is. There's some Terry.
So we have a story about this. So John, remember we met at the 7-Eleven before that?
Yeah.
If I remember, your grandma died in September of '85, right?
Yeah.
So we were and then that later came out because that came out. They had pictures of us standing there. You're in your Corvette, and they had pictures of the envelope, And I remember, so the week before, both of us, I was standing next to your car. I'm like, man, I got a bad feeling. You're like, so do I. And then the next week when I connected, you said your grandma died. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, maybe that's what we felt, right? And then a week after that, boom, I got popped.
Yeah. So the funny thing about this is this: Terry gets arrested. I don't know what I was doing back then when I was 19, 20 years old, but I had no fear, and I never thought I was going to get arrested because I always would run with my dog. So I'd run 4 miles a night, and I was fast. So he gave his load to a very upstanding citizen, let's just say right now. He's a very successful guy. And he calls me and he goes, I have a problem. Will you come to my house? And the police are outside. They're staking my house out. So when I go there and I just pretended like I was jogging and I had my hat on, sweats, a collar. And he's like, John, I've got more than 2 kilos and ounces here. I said, really? He goes, should I flush it? I go, no. I said, at the time, I said, you're talking 80 ounces at $2,000 a piece. I said, I don't think you should do that. And he's like, could you move it for me? I said, yeah, if you cut me a deal, I will.
Yeah,
so
I remember
now
that.
I had to, with police officers in the parking lot, I had to take all this cocaine out of there. And I'm looking outside the windows, and I'm like, which way am I going to run? Because I know they're going to chase me. And I loaded up, and I went out the back door, and I started to jog. And where it was back, there was like a creek. And I started to jog,
Jeez,
and the cars
memory.
turned around, and they're starting to follow me, and I just opened it up wide. And I was one of the few guys that had a cell phone.
Yes,
so I'm sitting there holding this big-ass brick, and I'm like, I make it down into the creek, and I'm calling my buddy. I says, man, I'm coming out. This is where I'm coming out, and I got 2 keys on me. Make sure that if there's any cops in the parking lot, don't look at me. Don't even open the door. I'll keep running by you. And I ended up making it out of there, and this guy had enough money to pay his lawyers after I ended up selling it for him. But I am stupid.
What was your beeper called back then? Do you remember? Mine was 3. So
Terry's was like 357.
Yeah. So that's what my this guy here, Nick. He had a getting more trouble, right? He was in El Reno when I was going through El Reno in Oklahoma.
Yeah, Nick was the biggest informant there ever was.
Was he really?
Yeah, he was a piece of shit.
I thought he got caught up with some New York mobsters after he got out.
No, Brian. You're thinking of Brian.
Robefia, that's it. Yeah, Nick is
Brian.
the bitch.
Yeah, Nick was the informant. Nick right away checked in. When we got indicted, I'm looking at this kid and I'm like, are you serious? You of all people.
He used to act like he was a badass.
And he acted like he was tough. And he ended up fighting this kid
pussy.
From Mount Greenwood, Jimmy Jones, and I had to pull Jimmy Jones off him. And I'm like, just this steroid, fake everything. Anyways.
Do you remember Pickle Joyce?
Tough kid. Well, the Joyces were all tough kids.
So I was in Gazanders.
Yeah.
Dating Dan Hampton's current wife right now. I don't know if you remember, in Gazanders, and then one of our other friends' cousin was working there, and Pickle and his buddies were. I just brought a brand new shirt, my first date with this girl, Gazanders back bar, And I'm sitting there. I ordered the first drink, just got there. And these 6 guys were drunk punks. I didn't like them. He likes them. I didn't like the Joyce brothers. And then they grabbed this girl's ass, and then she slapped the guy, and then he pushed her in the face. And then the one bouncer tried to like stop him, and they punched him. And I grabbed the guy, threw him down. Somebody grabbed a beer bottle. I got in a big fight. They tore my shirt off. Bouncers came, grabbed me, and then the other bouncer said, "Hey, he's with me." So they take all these guys up front to the bar. I tell my date, I said, "I'll be right back. I want to tell the police what I saw." I walk up front, and the Hickory Hills police go, "I know that guy. He's with the brothers." I'm like, "Hey," I helped him. And the doorman go, "No, he helped me. They locked me up, man. I got arrested for battery." And then when I was going to Bridgeview, it was a brand new courthouse then, right? So I'm in the courthouse, and this guy the pickle guy or whatever, I'm sitting there, and then the police take me outside, and they put me against the wall. They go, "You just looked at our witness." I go, "What are you talking?" I was all, that night it happened. I'm like, "What are you talking about? We saw you look at it. He left." I'm like, I didn't look at anybody. I didn't, because you were intimidating a witness. I go, "I swear to God, I wasn't looking at anybody. I don't even know what he looks like now." This was and so then they brought up Pellegrino, who got killed, remember?
Yeah.
And then they said, "You know something about that?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know anything about that." So long story short, I had to go to court for that for a while. It eventually got thrown out. But is there any more pictures? Oh my God. I about shit when I saw this on the news with John. So think about this, right? John did not get caught with a speck of cocaine. John has never been in trouble before. He was the first time in trouble, right? Never. And they gave this young kid 45 years in prison because a bunch of other kids told on him. Not that we didn't deserve, none of us, we all deserve to get in trouble. We all deserve to get in trouble. We all deserve to get punishment. But at the same time, there's other pictures I sent to you around the same time. Noriega got arrested. You guys all remember who Noriega is?
Noriega got more time than me.
He got 46 months, 46 years. You got 45. I'm like, what the hell? How does John get the same of the president of Nicaragua?
Yeah.
And he got 45 years in prison. So go ahead, you pick it up from there, buddy.
Well, it was just a bad time to being caught in the drug war. I mean, it was like my lawyers are like, they're looking for blood, and you should plead guilty. And I said that to the lawyers in the beginning. I'm like, why don't we just plead guilty and just forfeit everything? And they're like, well, they didn't catch you with anything. And the problem is with lawyers, and I got good friends that are lawyers, so don't get mad at me if anybody's listening. But a lawyer is prepped. We're going to beat it, and they pump you up about these feds are terrible. Look what they're doing to you. They're liars. And they're getting you all gung-ho ready for trial. And I'm saying to them, listen, we got 3 gun charges that I know I've got a great defense on that I'm not guilty of. There's no way in the world we're going to tell any jury a story that I'm not guilty of selling drugs when there's a speedboat, Callaway Corvette, brand new Harley Davidson, beautiful house, and all the money I spent. So why don't we just plead guilty to the cocaine and just go to trial on the gun charges if we can't get a deal? And I probably, if I would have pled guilty, would have got 10 years, been home in 5. But no, we're going to go to trial. They ain't got nothing on you. It's all hearsay. We'll get a jury. We'll get a mistrial, and then you'll be able to negotiate better. All bullshit. So at my trial, what really bothers me is I prepared a defense for the CCE, the Continuing Criminal Enterprise. And I'm like, listen, the jury wants to know, was I a big Colombian cartel drug dealer? No, I wasn't. There was me and a guy that collected money and a guy that delivered the coke, because the guy that picks up the money and the guy that delivers coke can never be at the same time. One guy goes to pick up the money, the other guy goes to drop off the cocaine when the money's off the scene. So I'm like, it was never bigger than 3 people, and they needed 5 to sink you on the CCE. I know, it was Continuing Criminal Enterprise.
It wasn't RICO?
No. CCE, Title 21 USC 848. So I tell my lawyer, I'm like, listen, on one of the tapes, one of my informants is telling another informant, don't buy off of Cappas, buy off of me, which means he's his own independent dealer. But the jury doesn't know he's stealing from me as my delivery guy, that he's selling ounces to one of my customers cheaper. He's like, yeah, I'm here dropping off 5 ounces, and don't just tell him you only need 2 and buy 3 from me. I'll give you a better price than Cappas. Because he delivered for me, I gave him a better price. So I'm like, why don't you play the Bonema tape? This kid, Ray Bonema, that was an informant. And he's like, yeah, that'll be perfect. And I go and explain it to the jury in layman's terms that you could shop at Jewel, Dominic's, Whole Foods. You don't have a contract with where you go grocery shopping. It was a buyer-seller agreement. I go, the kingpin charge should be very easy to beat because they don't have 5. They had just replacement personnel. So he goes, yeah, this is a great argument. I'll get the jury on board with just like a grocery store. The guy that's on the payroll is the butcher or the guy that works in the produce department, and the customers are free to choose who they buy from. And we'll bring up the Bonema tape that this guy was his own independent dealer. So the closing argument starts, and guess what happens? Doesn't mention one thing about the CCE. And at the end of the closing arguments, I'm like, hey, why didn't you bring up the CCE? That's the charge I'm going to get life on. And that's the charge they slammed me with 30 years. I got 15 on the guns and the cocaine. So I stand up, and I'm like, here, I want to talk to you. And I wanted to strangle him. I knew at that point in time, he dumped the case because in an unrelated proceeding to me, he was battling a bribery charge. They were trying to take his law license. And he wouldn't come by me, and he faded behind the marshals. And then the marshals surrounded him like, what are you doing, Cappas? Sit down. I go, I ain't sitting. I want to talk to my lawyer. And I should have just charged him and beat the hell out of him right then and there and tried to get a mistrial because, man, he laid me away. And it just goes to show you, in the beginning, they pretend to be your friends. Don't worry, we got it. It's like the lawyers in the 80s were the pimps and we were the whores.
Yeah, and they knew who had the money.
And
then they sell you on beating the case because they make money off of billable hours and they give you bullshit. And they
so
don't
being
care.
a 19, 20-year-old kid, you're in a grown man's game and you're way over your head.
So John,
everything was wrong about it. You know, you shouldn't have been doing it. There's nobody in that whole game that's your friend. Everybody's using everybody, you know? So it was just unfortunate.
So why don't you tell, I think another interesting story is, remember, southwest side of Chicago, great family. Tell these people what happened to you when you first went to Lewisburg. Lewisburg is one of the worst federal prisons in the United States of America.
Yeah.
They sent this guy to Lewisburg.
So here, we're in the MCC, and every one of my co-defendants has been designated to a prison that's a medium, like a camp. You know, some guys were going to the camp level 1, 2. Some guys were going to a medium, level 3, 4. The level 6 is Lewisburg, Leavenworth, and Lompoc that was in California. So this counselor I was pretty cool with that liked me, Jerry Urbanik, he goes, Johnny, I got some bad news. You're going to Lewisburg. And I'm like, what's Lewisburg? He goes, John, the most murders in the whole federal system are at USB Lewisburg. He goes, you got to be very careful. And he goes, and the regional director himself has designated you there. So he goes, probably the U.S. attorney's had his hand in it. So I'm on a bus. I am 21, 22 years old, and I am getting driven to USB Lewisburg, and here is these 30-foot walls and this gun tower with a big red strobe light. And all these people are talking tough, but when we pull up to that prison, everybody's dead quiet. When we go through orientation, they're like, did you cooperate with the government? Do you want to go to PC, protective custody? Are you going into the compound? And I'm like, I got 45 years. I'm going in the compound. So after they take the whole bus, there's one aisle and there's two seats on each side. There's like 25, 30 guys. There's only 4 of us that went in population. Everyone else is like, no, I'm refusing compound. I don't want to go here. And I was like, it still didn't get me where I was at. So we're in this movie theater. I'm thinking, this place ain't that bad at all. And then these guys are probably trying to scare me. I'm thinking, oh, man, you're going to get killed. These guys stabbed the guy in the shower when he was taking a shower. And there's blood on the wall over here. And I'm not listening to nobody because I was a tough kid. I wrestled. I boxed a little. I took taekwondo. And so I'm in the movie theater, and I hear somebody's choking. And on the movie is Beaches with Bette Milner and Barbara Hershey, where the one girl's dying, the daughter's crying. It's a very sad story, and all of a sudden I hear, And I look to the right of me, and the guy behind him's got a belt, and he's choking this guy. And the guy's like getting dragged over this church pew. Guy next to him pulls his hand down. And next thing you know, there's a knife like this far. And they strap it down with duct tape. Yeah, that's what they call them, strap down. And he takes the knife, and he's like, wham! And he's just like plunging this knife in his chest. So I'm thinking, man, what the hell's going on? I've been in plenty of fist fights. I've never seen a guy get stabbed. So I just look. I don't do anything. He takes the knife off. He throws it to this kid. They keep throwing the knife. They get the knife out of there. Here comes the cops. This guy's in the middle of the aisle, just with holes in his chest, bleeding like a stiff. And they got their goon squads, got the helmets and the shields and the billy clubs, like, get on your knees, put your hands over your head. And then they take us to segregation. So here's the killer. I'm in segregation. I'm strapped to a chair like this. And the captain's like, Cappas, what did you see? And I'm like, it was dark. I thought someone was choking on popcorn. He's like, you're an effing liar. And he's screaming, and the spit's coming from his mouth in my face. So this kid, John Nikes, who was from Boston, this half Greek, half Irish kid, goes, all right, that's enough. I murdered the guy. Give me the beef. Let these guys go. And I'm thinking, thank God. So, I'm thinking we're going to get out. Well, the guy that held the belt around his throat, he looked like Colonel Sanders with the white beard and all the tattoos. He had 992 on his ribs because he had 992 years because he killed his family, burned the house down, tried to collect the insurance money. That's how he got in the feds. John Condon stands up and he goes like this. I'll never forget it. Wait a minute. You're not going to take all the credit for the murder. I held the belt around his throat. I need credit for this murder. And I'm thinking, man, am I with some retards here?
Yeah.
And that's when I got in the law library, researched the books, and I was very helpful to my lawyers. They wrote an actual innocence argument for the guns in the first round, and I wrote the brief on an illegal sentence. In the first round, I found the holding case law where CC, conspiracy, double jeopardy, it got divided, and the greater included offense actually carried less time than the lesser included offense. And I found that case law. But I had excellent lawyers. I got a second chance at life. So I'm happy to be here today.
You had different lawyers for the appeal, right?
Yeah, very different lawyers for the appeal. Andrew Stays, like the God. If there's a guy that put me back on this earth, it was a guy named Andrew Stays. I love the guy like a brother.
I got one story, not as sensational as that. When I first was, my first week in Joliet, and I'm sitting there at the chow hall, and I see like these little holes in the wall, and I'm like, what the hell are those for? The guy's like, they sit up in the turret and stuff. He goes, if anyone's fighting, you dive on the floor right away because they shoot the Mini 14s, right? And then I walked out of the chow hall later that week, and there was a fight right when I was walking out, and you hear doon doon like that, and everyone dives on the floor. They do that in the federal shit too?
No, they had just the goon squad lived under the prison, so they would have like 30 guys all steroided out. They would just run up, and you cannot fight these guys because they got like the hockey equipment on. No matter where you're hitting them with a chest plate or a helmet.
Like the SORT team.
That's exactly what it was.
SORT teams in the state prisons.
There's a couple stories, funny stories about that, but we'll get to it another time.
Yeah, there's so many different things that we can talk about here. Again, I know some of these stories are we're sensationalizing, but I'm assuming you want to watch because you don't want to hear about them being boring. We're not endorsing the lifestyle. We're just explaining some.
But what happened happened.
Yeah. And so we changed our lives, and I really, I believe the things that I've been through, as well as John, made me successful in what I'm doing. It gave me the courage to just be the person I am, and you don't learn that. You don't learn that in college, Well, thank you for coming on there, Mr.
All
Cappas.
right. Tara, it was a pleasure.
See you, buddy. We'll have him back, all right? Bye.